Nolan Wells bombshell, death threat, blood, so much blood. Those aren't my words. Those are the words pulled directly from a federal criminal complaint, sent to a sitting judge, in the middle of an active death investigation. And here's what makes that sentence different from anything you've heard about this case so far. The full message, according to federal court documents, reads, "So much blood everywhere, hard to clean, especially from a boat." From a boat. Let that sit there for a second.
Death threats are flying. One actually says there's going to be blood, so much blood. Another death threat says, don't go outside. How can anybody do their jobs when they're getting death threats? Not only that, we understand this case is headed to a grand jury.
Because that isn't just a threat. That's a detail. A specific, pointed, deliberate detail. And right now, that three-word phrase, especially from a boat, is sitting inside a federal complaint while an 18-year-old boy's official autopsy is sealed, headed to a secret grand jury, and his family still does not have a cause of death. This is not just a case about what happened on Horn Island. This is the story of what happens when a death investigation starts threatening the people asking the questions. And we are going to go through every layer of it, right now. So here's where we are. Nolan Wells' official autopsy is complete, but remains under seal. It is headed to a secret grand jury. The public does not know what it says. The family does not know what it says. The only thing we have is the family's independent autopsy, and that result is troubling in its own right. The family's independent examination concluded that the cause and manner of death are undetermined pending further investigation.
This autopsy, the independent autopsy that you did, you mentioned that obviously, I think the part that people are really focusing on is that you mentioned that there was this discoloration, this red coloration on the back of Nolan's head. Did the examiner who looked at him have any inkling about what that might be? Could it be blunt force trauma? And I understand that the cause of death and manner is undetermined, but is it possible that it was blunt force trauma?
Well, he wants to be able to give his theories and opinions before the grand jury in Mississippi as to the possible causes of the red discoloration in the back of Nolan Wells' head near the occipital region of the brain. And so it's very significant. He concluded that it was undetermined pending further investigation, the manner and cause of death. But he did find that very significant that you had this red discoloration in the back of his brain in that occipital region of the brain, of the head. Also, he found it very significant. He said that they did not send his throat with his body in the second autopsy. He said when he was the chief medical examiner of D.C., this is something that's common. He said normally he would do it when they were investigating and studying whether there were fractures to the neck or some kind of, compressions to his vertebrae.
Right.
So that is significant, he found. And the most significant thing he said, what is the crux of the matter that we do not know, and that is, what was the condition of
The pathologist
Nolan Wells'
noted advanced
body
decomposition,
when he entered the
removal
water?
of key organs during the state autopsy, and an inconclusive red discoloration on the back of Wells's head. No fractures or deep tissue injuries were identified.
One thing to keep in mind is that when a body starts to decompose, when it's not found right away, bacteria will form alcohol in the bloodstream. So when the toxicology report does come back, if it has a little bit of alcohol in it, that is not necessarily an indication that Nolan Wells was drinking alcohol at the time he died or before he died. It could be an indication that bacteria were forming alcohol after his death, and he had no alcohol at the time he died. So what we need to do is we need to look at that report in light of how advanced the decomposition was at the time of the first autopsy in order to interpret it properly.
Think about what that means. The organs are gone, already removed by the state. and the family's own pathologist is looking at what's left and saying the cause of death still cannot be determined. That is not a conclusion. That is an open door. And while that door sits open, threatening messages are flying across state lines. Judges are deactivating their social media accounts. The FBI is making arrests. And the person at the center of it all, a 27-year-old man from Sacramento, California, was picked up at a public library. Notice this. The man arrested for the most alarming threat in this case did not know Nolan Wells. He had no connection to the island, no connection to the friends, no connection to the investigation. None of the three individuals charged with making threats appear to know Wells, his family, or the boating group, or be part of the investigation. So what is happening here? That is the question we are sitting with today, and it is not the one most people are asking. The question isn't just, what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island? The question is, why has this case produced a wave of federal criminal charges against strangers? What does the phrase, especially from a boat, mean when it comes from someone who was never there? And is there something about the public's distrust of this investigation that is now threatening to destroy the very witnesses who might have answers? Stay right here, because this is where it gets complicated. Let me bring you directly into the threat itself, because the complaint is public record, and the language inside it is worth your full attention. Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarche has been charged with interstate transmission of a threatening communication, a federal crime, for sending threats to Judge Ashley Cole. Dumarche was arrested by the FBI at a library in West Sacramento, California, on July 29, 2026. Dumarche, 27, allegedly messaged Jackson County Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole on social media, threatening to send a bomb to her office. Now here is who Judge Cole is, and this connection matters enormously. Dumarche allegedly contacted Judge Ashley Cole, who had posted on Facebook about the threats and her connection with the Wells family. Her son was with Wells the day he went missing and was cooperating with the investigation. She said her son loved Nolan dearly. So this is a sitting judge, a mother, whose own child was on that island, who watched her friend disappear, who came forward and cooperated, and she became a target. Dumarche allegedly messaged Cole threatening to send a bomb to her office that will blow you away when you see it. Once that package is opened, the timer will start, and then you have maybe 10 seconds or less to ask God for forgiveness, the message read, according to a court document filed in federal court. And then came the sentence we opened with. The message continued, blood. So much blood everywhere, hard to clean, especially from a boat, but yours will be quick, I promise. I got all your info. Not even the FBI can stop this. Especially from a boat. Let me be precise here. We do not know whether Dumarche had inside information. We do not know whether that phrase was a reference to anything specific or just designed to terrify. What we do know is that the FBI took it seriously enough to track him across the country, run down his email address, cross-reference his phone number, date of birth, and street addresses, and arrest him at a library. Authorities linked the social media account to Dumarche by tracing email IP addresses associated with it and cross-referencing a date of birth, phone number, and street addresses tied to the account. Dumarche also allegedly sent Cole pictures of her children and said he would strangle them. He has now been charged with interstate transmission of a threatening communication. If convicted, Dumarche could face up to 5 years in prison. Now here is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. When FBI agents arrested Dumarche, they drove him to the jail. And according to a report obtained by TMZ, one agent told him she would not be questioning him about his federal charges, but Dumarche started talking on his own. According to the report, Dumarche said he knew what this was about and acknowledged his words got him in trouble, before adding, "I hope they get justice for that boy." So the man who sent a bomb threat to a judge, who referenced blood on a boat, who said not even the FBI can stop this, looked at the FBI agents driving him to jail and said he wanted justice for Nolan Wells. What do you do with that? Now, before we go any further, I want to be precise about something. There are 3 people charged with threats in this case, not 1, 3. 3 people have been charged with threatening a judge, a witness, and local officials connected to the investigation into the death of Nolan Wells. The threats came amid rampant speculation and scrutiny of the investigation, deepened in part by uncertainty surrounding Wells's final hours, distrust of law enforcement, and the state's long history of racist violence. That last part is not a small detail. That is the soil this entire case is growing in. And you cannot understand why strangers in California and Ohio are sending federal-level threats to a Mississippi judge without understanding that context. The teenager, who was black, had traveled to the uninhabited island with a group of friends from high school, all of whom were white. That is the factual reality. That is not an opinion, and it is the reason this case traveled far beyond Jackson County, Mississippi, and landed in a national conversation about who gets answers and who doesn't. Now let's talk about what the family knows, and what they still don't. The family's attorney Ben Crump announced on July 22 that the cause and manner of death in the independent autopsy had been listed as undetermined, noting that it didn't appear that Nolan had suffered any fractures or deep tissue injuries, per the Associated Press. Undetermined, that word is doing enormous work in this case, because undetermined doesn't mean nothing happened. It means the evidence, as it currently stands, cannot point in a definitive direction, and the family's team is not accepting that as an answer. Forensic audio specialists are reviewing the complete CTO emergency call from July 4th. Ocean engineering experts are examining how Wells's body ultimately came to be recovered near the northwestern tip of Horn Island. Attorney Ben Crump said, "We want to know how is that possible with the oceanic tides. You've got low tides and high tides, so it's not adding up." Attorney Eric Hertz said discussions also continue regarding a joint forensic examination of cell phones connected to the case. Think about the mechanics of that for a second. The body recovery location, the tidal patterns, the currents. The family's team is not just asking who did what, they are asking how physics itself fits into what they were told happened, and they are bringing in ocean engineering experts to answer it. A newly enhanced recording of a July 4th emergency call from Wells's friends reportedly includes phrases like, "Is he dead?" and "Wake up." It is not known if those words apply to Nolan. Notice this. That audio exists. Forensic specialists are looking at it, and the most critical question about it, who are they talking about, has not been answered. Meanwhile, a purported toxicology report circulating through social media has been called fraudulent by officials. No official toxicology report has been released, and investigators urge the public to rely only on verified information while the case remains active. That matters, because in a case already burning with public fury, false information spreading online is gasoline, and some of that false information is now driving people to make federal-level threats. Here's the question I want you to sit with going into the next part of this. We have a sealed autopsy. We have a grand jury. We have 3 federal arrests for threats. We have an audio recording that experts are still analyzing. We have ocean engineers looking at tidal patterns. We have a family that says the body's location doesn't make sense. And we have a phrase inside a federal criminal complaint filed by the FBI that reads, "Hard to clean, especially from a boat." Whether that phrase is a threat, a reference, a coincidence, or something else entirely, that is one question. Whether the investigation into Nolan Wells's death will ever produce a formal finding of what actually happened, that is a completely different question. And right now, only one grand jury knows how close we are to an answer. Let me bring in an expert voice, because what's happening legally right now is not standard, and it deserves to be explained properly. Former federal prosecutors have noted that a secret grand jury in a death investigation of this nature signals that authorities are not done. A grand jury can be convened to determine whether charges should be filed. It does not mean charges are coming. But it does mean investigators believe there is enough to take to a formal legal body and say, "Look at what we have." A sealed autopsy going directly to a grand jury, without public release, is a specific legal choice. It protects the integrity of potential proceedings. It also means the family, the public, and the press are all waiting in the dark. And here is what a former prosecutor would tell you about that phrase in the complaint, especially from a boat. Even if that line was written purely to terrify, even if the person who wrote it had no connection to this case, the FBI still has to ask, How did a stranger land on a detail specific enough to reference a boat? Did they read it online? Did someone tell them something? Or is it a coincidence that the FBI now has on paper inside a federal court filing? Those are not rhetorical questions. Those are investigative ones. And right now, the FBI is the only body positioned to answer them. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department is investigating Wells' death, and the sheriff reached out to the FBI to help investigate interstate threats that have been received by friends of Wells, their families, Wells's parents, and public officials working on the case. So you have a local sheriff running a death investigation and a federal agency running a threat investigation. 2 tracks, both active, both touching the same set of people, and the grand jury sits above all of it, reviewing an autopsy nobody has seen. Does that look like a case that's winding down, or does it look like a case that's about to break open? Hundreds of miles from Mississippi, members of the New Orleans community gathered for a second-line procession to honor Wells and call for justice. Organizer Reuben Evans said the event was intended both to celebrate Wells's life and remind his family they were not alone. "We're not afraid to question. We want answers," Evans said. "We just want the Wells family to know we are behind y'all." That is what community pressure looks like. That is also what can push an investigation forward. And it is what can push a stranger in Sacramento to type words into a Facebook message that get him arrested by federal agents at a library. This case is not contained anymore. It never really was. Let me bring in an expert voice right here, because what's happening at the legal level deserves a clear explanation. And I want to make sure you understand exactly what the grand jury process means for where this case actually sits right now. The death of Nolan Wells is being presented to a grand jury in Mississippi. Jurors will review the evidence and decide whether a crime occurred and whether charges should be filed. That sounds straightforward, but here is what it actually means in practice. After the investigation is finished, Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath said she will let a grand jury decide whether any potential charges are warranted. This case is being treated as a priority, the district attorney said. Upon the conclusion of the investigation, the findings will go before a grand jury, which is our standard operating procedure for deaths that are not natural deaths. Standard operating procedure for deaths that are not natural deaths. Sit with that phrase for a second. The district attorney is not calling this a natural death. She is calling it a death that is not natural. And that language means the grand jury is not a formality. It is the official mechanism by which this case will be weighed, quietly, without cameras, without press releases, and without the public knowing what's in the sealed autopsy until the jury decides what to do with it. The district attorney says evidence will stay out of public view until the grand jury reviews it first, a move prosecutors say is meant to protect the integrity of the investigation. To be fair, that is a defensible legal position. You do not want evidence contaminated by public reaction before a formal proceeding. But it also means the family, who have been watching their son's case unfold in real time on social media, who have had to fight disinformation and fake documents and federal-level threats, are now waiting for a room full of strangers they will never meet to tell them whether what happened to their child constitutes a crime. Think about what that means. Now here is the expert analysis that changes this beat entirely. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer spoke publicly about where the evidence stands. Coffindaffer says, "A review of surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and the area's riptide conditions point toward a tragic accident rather than foul play. About 60 witnesses have been interviewed so far. 60 witnesses on an uninhabited island for a 4th of July gathering. That is not a small investigation. That is a thorough one. And when a former FBI special agent with decades of investigative experience looks at surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and environmental data and says the evidence points toward accident, that matters. That is not a dismissal. That is a read of the record as it currently stands." But here is what Coffindaffer also said, and this is the part that should make you pause. "I doubt if this, what we know, will come back with the truth," she said, warning more details could still emerge. Notice this. The former FBI agent who says the evidence currently points toward an accident is also saying she doubts what we know right now will be the final answer. Those two statements exist at the same time, and that is precisely where this case lives. In the space between what the evidence currently says and what the full picture will eventually show. Coffindaffer says both versions could be true. I think it's more of a timing issue rather than something that is untrue on either end, she says. Both versions, the official theory and the family's questions, not necessarily in conflict, possibly a matter of what happened when, and who knew what, and when they said it. The phone is part of that. An independent investigation of Wells' cell phone is being coordinated by attorney Ben Crump and his team. Law enforcement officials will also investigate the cell phone findings. And there is something specific the family wants answered about what was on that phone. Wells's mother, Christine Wansley, told Good Morning America she suspects Snapchat messages from July 4th were deleted because her son frequently used the social media app, yet there wasn't anything saved on his account from that day. Nothing saved from that day. An 18-year-old, on a holiday, with a group of friends, and nothing on his most used app from those hours. A retired FBI agent, Kieran Ramsey, told News Nation that investigators may be able to recover several layers of data from the 18-year-old Snapchat account, even if information was deleted. Ramsey said authorities can send preservation letters to Snapchat for information stored on the company's servers. He added investigators can obtain cell phone data, including Snapchat geolocation information, to track Wells' movements and those of anyone who was with him July 4th. Geolocation, from a deleted app, from a phone that both law enforcement and the family's team are now jointly examining. Whether the Snapchat data still exists is one question. Whether it shows anything relevant is a completely different question. And right now, neither has been answered. But here's what we do know. A newly completed independent analytical review of photographs, videos, GPS coordinates, and witness accounts concludes that the available evidence still leaves a material gap in the timeline between Wells' last independently corroborated sighting and the recovery of his body. A material gap, that phrase is important. Not a discrepancy, not a conflict in accounts, a material gap between the last confirmed sighting and the recovery. And that gap is what the grand jury now has to look at, alongside a sealed autopsy that neither the family nor the public has seen. Does that look like a case that's closing? Or does it look like a case that's about to crack open at the seams? Now let me show you the pattern, because this case does not exist in a vacuum, and understanding what's happening around it matters as much as understanding what's happening inside it. The case has drawn speculation about the integrity of the official investigation by the Wells family and their attorney Benjamin Crump, who have alleged possible racial bias in the investigation. Public attention has been fueled by race tensions in Mississippi and by Wells, who was black, disappearing at a mostly white gathering. That context is not editorial opinion. That is the documented reason this case became a national story. And that is the documented reason strangers in California are sending bomb threats to Mississippi judges on Facebook. Here is the pattern worth paying attention to. When public distrust of an investigation runs this deep, it does two things. First, it applies pressure that can force a more thorough investigation than might otherwise happen. More witnesses interviewed, more evidence examined, more outside eyes on the process. That pressure, in cases with histories of institutional failure, has sometimes produced accountability that wouldn't have existed without it. But the second thing it does is dangerous. It can destroy the very witnesses who hold answers. Because when a judge posts publicly that her son was on the island and cooperated with investigators, and then receives a bomb threat with the phrase, especially from a boat, that judge is now afraid. Her children were in the photos sent by the person who threatened her. Cole wrote that she deactivated her Facebook and that she fears for the safety of her children. Cole wrote, "No one in our family is trying in any way to impede with the investigation by law enforcement or to otherwise hamper the family and law enforcement's quest for answers," adding that her son cooperated fully with the sheriff's investigation. A cooperative witness, a judge, a mother, deactivated her account, fears for her children. And she came forward anyway. Think about what it costs someone to do that. Think about what it would cost anyone in that position to keep being visible, to keep cooperating, when the internet has already found your children's photos and someone has already been arrested for threatening to strangle them. Now think about every other witness in this case who is not a judge, who does not have the law's protection the way a court officer might, who is watching what happened to Ashley Cole and deciding whether to pick up the phone when investigators call back. That is what happens when online rage, however understandable in its origin, outpaces the evidence. It does not speed up justice. It threatens to collapse the very scaffolding justice requires. And here is what makes the Nolan Wells case different from the cases this pattern echoes. There is an active grand jury. There is a sealed autopsy. There is a joint cell phone examination. There is forensic audio analysis. There is ocean engineering review. Investigators have completed the state's autopsy. Prosecutors are preparing to present evidence to a grand jury. Attorneys on both sides are positioning for possible civil litigation, and state officials are warning the public about fake documents circulating online. This is not a closed case. This is not a dismissed case. This is a case under active, multi-agency, multi-expert examination, and that is a direct result of the family refusing to accept the first answer they were given. Remember the material gap we talked about in the timeline analysis. Here is why it matters now, in a way it didn't before. The independent analytical review that confirmed that gap also identified it as the central question the grand jury will have to answer. Not whether Nolan Wells drowned, not whether the island is dangerous, but what happened in the space between 3 p.m. on July 4th and the recovery of his body on July 6. 60 witnesses, a sealed autopsy, a joint phone examination, a grand jury, and a phrase in a federal criminal complaint that references blood on a boat. All of it is pointed at the same gap, the same unanswered hours. Now let's talk about what the family is actually asking for, because that is not the same thing as asking for a specific outcome. Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, wrote publicly and directly, "If advocating for our deceased child to have a fair, honest, and transparent investigation, while asking local authorities to treat his case as if it were their own, makes you feel some type of way, please unfriend and block me, because this is my social media page," Wansley wrote. She continued, "We are not asking for special treatment. We just want the truth. His father and I will not stop searching for the truth." That is not a verdict request. That is a process request. Fair, honest, transparent. She is not telling the grand jury what to find. She is telling them to take her son's life seriously enough to look at everything. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked. Ben Crump said, "A thorough investigation must be completed, and the district attorney must put every relevant fact before the grand jury. Nothing held back. Nothing overlooked." Here is where things stand legally as of now. The original autopsy conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office is now complete, but its findings and all other evidence in the case will be sealed until a grand jury is able to review them. Authorities have said they believe it is likely that Wells' death was an accidental drowning. That is the official posture, but no formal ruling has been issued, no charges have been filed, and no grand jury has yet returned a finding. As of August 7th, investigators have not made a determination on the manner of Wells' death. That is the legal status of this case. Right now, today, an independent investigation of Wells' cell phone is being coordinated by Crump's team. Law enforcement officials will also investigate the cell phone findings. The forensic audio review of the CETO call is active. The ocean engineering analysis is active. Discussions continue regarding a joint forensic examination of cell phones connected to the case, an inspection that attorney Eric Hertz expects would include the FBI if it proceeds. No court date has been announced because no charges have been filed. What exists is a grand jury process with no public timeline. What we know for certain is this: 3 people have been federally charged with threats. A sealed autopsy is in grand jury hands. A material gap in the timeline has been formally identified, and a family from Ocean Springs, Mississippi has not stopped pushing. Not for one day. Christine remembered her son as gentle, loving, and able to make people around him feel welcomed and valued. Wells had played football at Southwest Mississippi Community College and was preparing to return to school. He would have turned 19 in August. He was preparing to go back to school. He was a kid who made people around him feel welcomed and valued. And his mother's last public message about him was 5 words: I miss my sunshine. Life has been difficult, but advocating for you is worth it. That is what justice looks like to Christine Wansley. Not a headline, not a verdict she chose in advance. Advocating for her son, refusing to stop, making sure that if there is an answer, it gets found. Making sure the grand jury sees everything. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked. So here's the question we came in with, and I'm not going to answer it for you, because it hasn't been answered yet. The question is not just what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island. The question is what happens when public grief becomes federal crimes, when the witnesses who hold answers are being threatened into silence, when a sealed autopsy sits in front of a grand jury while the internet burns around it, and when a phrase in a criminal complaint, especially from a boat, hangs in the air without explanation. Whether a grand jury returns a finding of criminal conduct is one question. Whether the full picture of Nolan Wells's final hours will ever be publicly known is a completely different question. And right now, only the grand jury is in a position to answer the first one. We will keep following this case until there are real answers. If this case matters to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next update. And before you go, I want to ask you one thing. Leave it in the comments. Now that you've heard about the material gap in the timeline, the sealed autopsy, and the phrase, especially from a boat, in a federal complaint, what stands out to you most? What is the one piece of this that you think is not getting enough attention? Because Christine Wansley is still out there, advocating, every day, saying her son's life was worth fighting for. And it was.